Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I need to check how I can hear whether you're hearing me. Thanks. I see people waving, so it shows you're hearing me. Thank you very much, and thank you for accepting and attending this update webinar that we have on the Sustainability Progress Framework. I want to welcome you all, and also thanking you for even finding time at times with a bit of short notice. But we are glad that you've come in large numbers. We have almost about 45 registered participants, so it's going to be a big group. And it's also going to be a big group of different people. So people who've been with us in the process for the long haul, and people who are joining us at the moment, and people who've been veterans in these discussions. So we are going to try and accommodate everybody in the discussion just to ensure that we are all on the same page. The idea for these webinars is really to get us all updated on what has been happening in the discussions on the Sustainability Progress Framework, and also to give a chance to members, stakeholders, friends, and other participants to improve the process that we are having, because we know it's not an easy process, and we need your input with time. Many of you have been very gracious with their time, and also very gracious with their expertise, and we really appreciate these. And I will go through that as we continue. So without further ado, I think we are already past half of the registrants, and since we are recording this webinar, I'm going to have us then just continue into the discussions. I was going to give Jenny a chance to say something small as we get into the details. But in the absence of that, I think I will just take it on and continue. So what are we talking about? So in this particular part, we'll mention a bit about the process so far, just like we said, to get everyone who's not been part of the process at least involved in it. And then the other part is we'll talk about a process that has happened in the past few months, gratefully facilitated by the Sustainable Coffee Challenge and the outcomes of that. Then we will talk about the discrete proposal for what the actual indicators would then be. And then finally, we are going to talk about a quick survey just to ensure that you get a chance, if you've not been part of the process, also to say about if we were to start reporting by the end of this year, which of those indicators would you be comfortable with? So it will be more like a ranking process. So just to give a bit of the history, it's always good to show where we are coming from before we decide where we are going to. So way back in October 2015 in the Global Coffee Forum, we had a very wonderful keynote address, which was immediately after the SDGs had been released in New York in September. And one of the things the keynote speaker, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, talked about is the fact that we are at that point in history when there's a consensus about what needs to be done to ensure that then we achieve sustainable development. And for coffee, of course, sustainability has been key for many years. And at this point, then the world is in consensus about some of the things that are necessary to get that done. And at that point, he suggested to us 5 SDGs that he thought coffee participants would contribute to, coffee stakeholders would contribute to. And he asked us then to go out and work on that. And coffee people are usually very good at taking challenges. So coffee is a challenging crop. So we took the challenge, and there were discussions on Vision 2020 and SDGs in countries that have national platforms as part of these discussions, which then looked at, which of those SDGs do they think in their own country they'll make most change to, and analyze that. And then at the same time, together with the Specialty Coffee Association of America and the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, we also had a study to try and catalog what are some of the sustainability efforts that coffee stakeholders are doing, and even cataloging about what is the estimated annual budget of those efforts, and which came to about 2% of the green coffee value at that time, estimatedly. But the big question was, there is that big intervention that is being done, which is quite a considerable percentage of the value of the coffee, but what is it leading to? And so then in October I think is key for coffee. It's also the beginning of the coffee year in many countries. In October, GCP members met and agreed in the terms of participation to report to a framework once that framework was put in place. So of course, then the key mandate then by members was to ensure that that framework then is developed within the best time possible, and then members facilitated towards then reporting to that. And of course, we like talking about what does that membership represent in terms of percentage globally, in terms of the coffee that they touch. Then at the same time, there was the process through the Sustainable Coffee Challenge in a 2016 working group that then was also trying to talk about, what does sustainability mean in coffee? What do we need to reach to? What's the definition for success? What are some of the impacts and outcomes we need to get to? What are some of the intervention pathways that we know out there? And on top of that, what would be the theory of change towards achieving this? So then there was that process going on, and then when we got to then 2017, there was the feeling that as part of GCP's dream of aligning what is happening, that then the process that was happening with the Sustainable Coffee Challenge and what GCP was planning as part of the push by the members and the Vision 2020 dialogue, that then there needs to be a bit of alignment to try and bring these things together so that then we are all working on one framework for coffee. And this was specifically met when we signed an MOU with the Sustainable Coffee Challenge back in February 2017. And then at the same time, the countries through the national platforms or the country national platforms, and for instance, in Brazil, where there is a concrete event working group, was also working on this issue of how do they show as a country then what sustainability they're achieving through whatever efforts they're having. And in particular, this one, there's a national sustainability curriculum that then, tries to ensure that the practices move to become more sustainable. And they came up with about 34 indicators. And at the same time, we also knew we were not starting from scratch. And it's always good, they say, you stand taller when you stand on the shoulders of giants. And so there was learning from other frameworks that were happening at the same time, either in different crops or across the agriculture sector, or across sustainability standards like, ISIL, there's COSA, there's a cotton one, there's Cocoa Action, there's rice, and rice, all pun intended, Sustainable Food Lab. And the latest one also, the Sustainable Development Goal Indicator 2.4.1, which is really on the indicators for sustainable agriculture. So then after that, then this input was given to a working group, of course, facilitated greatly by the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, but that brought together, GCP members and other coffee stakeholders towards deciding what are the key impact and outcomes that then we need to measure. And then, of course, ask ourselves the question on how do we measure this? And this, of course, led to a product of version 2 of the Sustainability Progress Framework way back in June 27th. And this document is available for those of you that want to peruse a bit more of the detail that different members, including some of us in this meeting, have contributed to. I will put a link for that on GCP Connect, whereby then you can go and also maybe add your knowledge to that document, since it's a living document. But in a nutshell, some of the things that then it's covered is why do we need these things? Of course, we want to see where we are as a sector. Where is the 2% of the coffee value leading us to? And then the other question we also want to ask ourselves to see is where we are individually, but in a common way still, using the same measure, so that then we are not talking about different measures of what we are doing. And of course, the benefit for that is that when we know where we are, either as a sector or individually, then we can ask ourselves questions like why and how do we either change, or how do we continue with the good work that we are doing in a concrete way. And in terms of some of the areas that were seen by this working group, or that needed, of course, where possible outcomes and inputs would come from, is issues to do, like in terms of poverty, issues to do with income, equitable distribution of that income, whereas early outcomes would be the capacity, increased access to education, representation of women and youth, people earning, of course, reasonable either living or minimum or certain amount of wages that is acceptable, access to potable water, improve labor practices, those in terms of improving the livelihoods. Then in terms of prosperity, of course, things to do with profitability, reduction of costs, increased resilience, whereby then people have more effect to handle shocks, optimized productivity, things to do with quality, adoption of processes. And then in terms of conserving nature, things to do with water, things to do with soils, things to do with greenhouse gases and climate change, things to do with forests, things to do with biodiversity, and so on. And all those, if we are to summarize, then we'll be covering these particular areas where, when we are talking about farmer prosperity, is talking about either the profitability, the land productivity, because there is also productivity of labor. But I think for coffee, this one has had more strength, the productivity of the land, and optimization of the cost, so that then whatever output we are getting from the cost is really high. Other things are to do with decent work, so people are getting, right wages, and they are working in the right conditions, and so on, and being able to show how far we are on that. Labor rights, and this is issues to do with either slavery or child labor, and also equitable opportunities, either for marginalized people, minorities, or either for different genders or for different age groups like youth and so on. So all that put together. Then the other part, of course, was conservation of nature. And here, like we mentioned, there is water, there is soil, there is deforestation, climate change, and biodiversity, among other things. So those are some of the key areas. So the next step was then to ask ourselves, how do we then measure in a common way the progress that we are making towards these particular outcomes that then define what maybe sustainable coffee would eventually mean. And what we've done is the fact that from the group, we can come up with so many. I mean, from the catalog, we can come up with so many. But the questions we want to ask ourselves now is, first of all, what are some of the key things that are, really affecting the sector that we need to say something about? And for those of you that came from Colombia in the last month, you know about the discussion about, the fact that the farmer is not getting proportionately amount of the wealth that coffee should be. And that's a key objective. But then how do we then measure in a common way, so that then we're able to address that topic, in a very good way? So what we are proposing here are some of the indicators. And again, they keep reducing in number, because at the end of the day, we do not want members to go home with a very large catalog or list of things they have to pick. But we want to be able to pick things that say much about the sector, but that also are possible, to measure. So it doesn't break your bank, but it also says a lot and guides your direction. And in terms of these, when we talk about prosperity or the economic part, so some of the things that are thought here is, of course, productivity improvement. So the productivity is key. And of course, ensuring that it's optimal, because we know as stakeholders, we have use cases whereby productivity has gone too way up, and then it becomes a challenge, or it's too low, and then it becomes a challenge. How do we address those? And then, of course, there are others, about 6, but one of the challenges that we have now that we are releasing to you, both as stakeholders and as members, is how can we further reduce these to something that is actionable, that for those of you that are in the industry, then can even begin, like giving information about, as soon as practically possible. That's the kind of question, because we do not want to dwell onto the topic of really getting the perfect, or 3 or perfect 100, and then it takes us 3 years to 2020, whereby we can start at a point and then, of course, improve much further, but start in a common way. And for many of us, I know in this meeting, have already, have information about this. I mean, I start with the prosperity one because I think for many of us, these are issues we are already capturing, except maybe from some of the deeper ones, like, actual costs of production or actual income or profit. But issues to do with productivity are things that we are capturing. Issues to do with companies being able to show what commitments they are making in terms of purchasing, sustainable. Those are things we are already doing, either whether you define sustainability through a standard or sustainability through a process and so on. That we are already capturing, and many of us are reporting in our CSR reports. But the other parts also included, like you will see on one of the final impacts, is issues to do with resilience. Because yes, farmers could make money, but how do we ensure that if there are shocks in future, that then these farmers still are able to continue? And this has to do with issues either of assets or access maybe to finance or increased diversification, or and in terms of what farmers are receiving, it could be maybe efficiency in the chain, so that then there is an increased share of the FOB price, which is free on board, just to ensure the acronyms are not misused. Free on board price to the farmer, what percentage of that the farmer is getting, and so on. And so this is partly the proposal. And again, don't feel constrained if you have something better, because at the end of the day, like we said, we stand taller when we stand on the shoulders of giants. And we know we have giants in this team who might not have been party or available when some discussions were being made, but they have really good information to provide. So that is on prosperity, and I will just touch on them quickly and then maybe mention a process that will enable us even feed much better into this. And the other key thing that I also want to mention here is the indicator describes maybe a point we want to be or something we want to achieve. It indicates something. But what we collect on the field is actually the metrics. And the reason I'm touching this is because, for instance, a country like Brazil that came up with the 34 indicators, a good percentage of that were either output or early outcome indicators, because it was partly based at showing what the processes they're having right now are contributing to. So the wording that we have here, or the level of the indicator that we have here, might not be the same, but it's key to note that the information they collect on something like productivity, whether it's the hectareage, which is the denominator, and the kilos, which it is, that is what is key. So we can change the indicator, but then the metric that we use to collect on the ground is very important, because once you've collected it from the farmer, you can't go back in case you want to change. So I also want us to be able to think about those indicators also in terms of what data do we need to collect, rather than the wording of the indicator. but in terms of what data do we need to collect. And there is a process, and some of us in this group have also pushed that process in saying we need then to describe these indicators into what we'll be collecting. And there's a process for that. And those of you that are also experts in that, after the call, you can also write. So then we also push that in terms of clearly describing the metric that is collected, because this is what is important. We can later on change, kilos per hectare to kilos per farmer, but we cannot change the fact that we should have collected the right kilos at the right time of collecting. So even as we think about those, let's also think about that particular dimension. The other part is in relation to nature. Again, this is also an area whereby many of us have been collecting, but also an area that has some things that we need to collect that are usually not very cheap if you are to do them in the right way, which is whereby then proxies or best practices that other people have used in the field might come in handy to help us say something with the same weight. Because the other thing we need to think about is if we go out as a sector to say something, then it has to be something that is weighty, so that then we are not just getting ourselves into problems. And the other thing I forgot to mention, just in case there are some questions that we might have during the discussion, and I want to reduce my monologue very soon, but just in case there are questions that we may have as I am doing my short monologue, please type them on the chat so that then we don't lose it when it comes, to the point of the discussions. So the other one, like I said, in terms of nature, we have things like there's water, and these ones are key. There's water, there's soil, there's energy, there's the climate, there's the forests, and there's biodiversity, and so on. So those are thought of in that way. And the beauty of this area is twofold. One of them is that, efforts to do with things like deforestation and water, there has been a lot of development in technology in trying also to get to a level where you can remotely check that, such that if I know where you are in Bonn, then the particular point, then I can tell over years, the state of forests in that particular part. So this is what I would call some of the quick wins, as long as we know where our farmers are or where those hectares are. And but we also have some more challenging ones, like things to do with the percentage of organic matter in the soil, because then this requires a bit of more. And I know those of you that are experts in these might know easier ways of being able to tell soil health as an indicator, so that then we know the soils that we are working on are healthy, or we want to improve the soils that we are working on for posterity. Reduction in energy, I think, has energy use, especially, or movement towards renewable energy, I think are key. And like we're saying, the issue of nature conservation is about, of course, optimal use of resources, or use of resources in such a way that then we have less and less impact. Conservation area, that one has to do with biodiversity. And I think in some of the discussions we had in the working groups, there were even comments that biodiversity does not always need to be outside the coffee farm. It could also be even inside the coffee farm. So there are those kind of discussions. Water use, I think, is key to many countries, but I know there's always been the challenge when we are talking about water use reduction, of how we ensure we know the exact amount of water we are using. But again, we are putting it out there. The reduction in pesticide and agrochemical use, and also the optimization of fertilizer use, at this point has also been used as a proxy for, the waste that gets into the water. So because waste, measuring the water for waste is a bit more challenging, but the way we lead to that waste in the water is through some of these key things. And some of the members have been very instrumental in suggesting that as a proxy. And then last but not least, of course, it's on the very other end, although this is a process that has not continued very well, the product environmental footprint, because the other question was, how do we tell that we are not only pushing the issue of sustainability on the farmer. We might say we are farmer-centric, but then also end up burdening the farmer on proof that, coffee is sustainable. So there was the other part of asking ourselves, how do we ensure the rest of the chain is also thinking about the impact they're having in the sector? And this was a particular one that was suggested because there was already a process on it. But then I realized the other day that it's sort of like the process pulled out on determining the product environmental footprint for coffee, the methodology for that and so on. But I leave it there as a thought, but I know many of you wouldn't put it as one of either the 3 or the 4 in your choices. But again, it's good to have. And also for those of you that have been in meetings before, we had many other indicators on early outcomes like adoption of practices and so on. But we chose at this particular level, and you could correct me if you think I'm wrong, that at this particular level, we need to look at what actual changes have happened because of either the adoption of the practices or the investments being put in and so on. So that was the kind of rationale that was put in trying to remove the lower side. But in instances where it becomes then very challenging to say anything about late outcomes, like I said, then you could also propose proxies, because at the end of the day, like we said, we do not want to break the bank to be able to say something constructive about the change that we are having. Then last but not least, and you're about to hear me stop, last but not least is on the issue of indicators for livelihoods, or really the people. And on this one, like we said, on issues like on decent work, an example would be reduction in workplace accidents. On the issue of rights, it would be either the number or percentage of children in any form of child labor, or number or percentage of workers in any form of forced labor. And again, there was the option of really disaggregating all these things when we talk about them into either male or female, or if we are talking about children, also thinking about the boy and the girl child where possible. So those are actually, things that maybe we might put in mind. Then the other part, of course, is in relation to the earning. So as part of, thinking about poverty or proper livelihoods, is really thinking about the earnings, and there are discussions of either it's minimum or living wage. But again, I think, like we said, even as we get into the discussion of the threshold, the part that we need to be comfortable about is that will we be able to collect those wages so as to compare them to either a living wage or a minimum wage or a GCP agreed wage or so on at the back of our minds. Then in relation, of course, to education and also partly also to try and reduce child labor is attendance and active enrollment to schools as an indicator. But again, when you look at them, also think about if you were to take 4 from these, which ones would we check, which I think is the exercise we need to get to. Then the other one, of course, in relation to hunger is number of days without sufficient food, or what people called hunger days. So that then as a proposed indicator to try and show that. On the output side, it just shows the numbers, the reach, but it's put there to also try to help us think about whether we think it would be really possible when we are doing this in our areas to disaggregate it to those levels, in terms of gender, in terms of when you're talking about youth, it would even mean disaggregation by age, so that then you know who is youth and who is not, and so on. And then last but not least, of course, we hope the impact is what percentage of our farmers or what percentage of our beneficiaries are above the poverty line, SDG 1, as a final thing to look at. As I end my long discussions, 30 minutes is quite long to talk. I want to draw us also back to the fact that we are not in these discussions alone, and the countries, through the guidance of the FAO, are working on indicators for SDG indicator 2.4.1, which is an aggregate indicator, but what is key is that it describes what area under sustainable agriculture is. And when you look at how they've tried to describe that, the places put put in green are the ones that correlate to what we've discussed up there as part of the indicators. So the beauty with this is the fact that we are at a point whereby, as a coffee industry, even if we went out and used those indicators we are proposing to ourselves, then we would be speaking a common language with what the rest of the world is going also to be saying. Unfortunately, this process is taking on until the end of the year, so we are not able to have the final methodology and all that to compare with the proposals we are giving the coffee industry. But the beauty with this is that when we look at it that way, we can also tell ourselves we are not far away from where the rest of the world is going to be going to, even if as coffee, we are usually, the front runners. So last but not least, at the end of this, there will be a survey that will be going around. And again, the idea of the survey, it's a simplified one, where it looks at those indicators that have shown up there and then engages you to try and rank them in terms of which ones would you be comfortable with to start first, in terms of when you look at yourselves, when you look at the kind of information you're already collecting and so on, which ones would you be very comfortable to start with as a start. And I will give the link. The one that is here, please do not use it. It was a preview link. So the exact link will be out there. But the other thing would also be asking of you is in instances where you know a better way of either saying what we are trying to say or measuring what we want to achieve, please feel free on the comments part to really tell it to us. Because at the end of the day, this is a joint effort, and we want to give the coffee industry, the best that is there. And we know part of that best is the fact that some of you are already experts in this. So next steps, before then we go back into the discussion. I think it gives us about 30 minutes of an open discussion. If we finish earlier, even better. The next steps were, of course, trying to get really expert outputs on the list, which is what we've done. So today we've shared the list with members and other stakeholders. I realize in the meeting it's not only members. I mean, I saw we even have participants from Sugar, which is interesting. But I hope they can also comment and tell us, how we are going about this and whether we can learn also from sugar. I know we've learned from rice, we've learned from cocoa and cotton, but even sugar would be a nice way, to pick things from. Then later, we'll give you an update on reporting tools. And the idea for this is the fact that we do not want to get to a point where we just put a list out there, but we do not use the resources and the expertise and the alignment within the sector to try and help us also report effectively. So in instances where we know some people have good tools, and for instance, in the meeting we have COSA and we have other experts who have good tools. We have companies right here who have awesome tools and they've been collecting data with. We want to get to a point also where we ensure that collecting that information is not a burden, but the benefits in terms of the knowledge that you get, from using those indicators far outweighs the cost it will take you. And I believe that's what we are talking about, optimization, where you gain more than what it costs you, either in time, in resources, and all that. Then for us, that's what we are looking for in terms of the alignment. Then in October, during the MA, of course, then we'll give members a chance, of course, then to decide, which indicators we can start a report on. It could be one indicator. For instance, there's a big discussion on the economic viability of farming. It could be an indicator on the profitability, or it could even just be productivity, because maybe we do not have enough information on the costs and the income. But if we have, then we could move it to that level. So that would be a chance. And then hopefully from that chance, then towards December 2017, we will also try and showcase what we can try to achieve commonly together. And for these last parts, there will also be a chance, and feel free to click framework at globalcoffeeplatform.org and reach out to us if you also want to use your channel to try and test some of these tools. So there'll be a webinar in September on the reporting tool. But if you want to use your supply chain to try and test these, even before the members agree on what we are going to report on, then you're very welcome. And I know I've had in some discussions some volunteers, but we also want to put it out there in the public, and I think we might put it in the espresso of September, so that then we give you a chance, but then also try and engender the drive, to report commonly. And so there is a call list updated. So the next call will be on September 7th. And this one will be about the reporting. And then hopefully September 19 also for updates. But we will also use that part because there's a survey that we are giving to you after this. We'll also use that part to update you on some of the things that have come up. And again, I encourage you to throw those questions quickly, if you can. And then the last thing is, of course, questions. So write them. And the list and everything. This slide was a bit updated. There's one on GCP Connect, which you got on your invite. But this updated one will be on the same portal, because then we also want to have a common place where you can check in at any time and find the latest documents. So maybe to answer some of the questions, although let me let people talk so that then we do not continue hearing my voices. I hope you're able either to unmute yourselves, yeah? Or please raise the hand and then raise hands, and then I see how to go about it. Today we used webinar, which is a bit different from the meeting one. So I don't know what strengths you have on the other side in terms of what you can be able to do or not do. But if you raise your hand, then I can try one or two things. But as I give you a chance to think about your questions, let me give Jenny a chance to say something as we continue. So Jenny, I don't know whether you can talk. Yeah, I think you can. Hello. But in the meantime, anyone with a question, I think, I don't know whether Camilo, you have another question. I could also promote you to a panelist. Oh, and I see a question coming. See a raised hand.
Hello.
So I'll unmute. Ruben Golonzia, you're unmuted. You can say something.
Yes. Hi, my name is Rubén Galotri from UTS, Honduras. I think that this indicator of environmental footprint is really good because you have a lot of impacts, environmental impacts in just one indicator. But I don't know if you have considered that in the moment that we can use this indicator, I don't know if you consider that it is at this moment is kind of a specialist ability to do this. Is you have to have a lot of knowledge to implement this indicator, and also it can be kind of expensive. I don't know if you think about this also. Thank you.
Sorry, Ruben. I just realized I'm the one who had been muted in listening. So if you don't mind, and I was wondering why the place was so quiet. If you don't mind, can I please ask you to say what you just said again? Apologies for my.
Yes, no problem.
Okay.
I was saying that the environmental footprint is a really good indicator of what is happening in regarding environment and coffee production, because you can have like 14 indicators of environmental impact in just one number. But the thing is that maybe at this moment, there's a few people that can implement this indicator, because you have to have a lot of tools, you have to have a lot of information, and it can be also kind of expensive. I don't know if you're thinking to use this indicator maybe in later stages of the of GCP. I think it's a good idea to use it, but maybe at this moment it can be a little bit hard because it's kind of expensive and it's kind of new. But also, I want to add that Europe Union is having this initiative of trying to implement environmental footprint in coffee and other products, I think by the year 2020. So if we use this indicator, we will be aligned with this initiative of the Europe Union.
Thank you very much, Ruben. And that is particularly very true, and which is why when I was discussing that particular one, I said it's a good one, but then we need to ask ourselves questions whether we have the capacity to, and I like that sentiment. So what we will have in the lists, you could also think about maybe in your ranking what you could start with, so that then you say what I'm giving number one is what I start with first, but then also noting there, just like you've mentioned, the fact that it's a very good indicator because it's a one in all, but then asking ourselves, can we build our systems to be able to say something about it maybe in the next 4 years? Because again, this journey is to 2030. So the more we improve our ability to do things, the better. And again, let me apologize. I don't know whether anyone tried to talk when my system was muted, but if there's someone who tried to, I could ask you, please say something again.
Hello, this is Camilo Sanchez from Olam. I just have a couple of comments. Are you listening?
Yes, thank you, Camilo.
Okay, George, thank you very much for the presentation and the update. I have several questions. Of course, this is a very difficult equation, but in the definition of the long-term versus short-term outcomes, what is the time frame? Because I still think that the income can be measured in a one crop season and show some kind of progress on that. So I saw it like as part of the long-term outcomes, and just like to know if that's being reviewed or what is the point of that.
Thank you very much, Camilo, for that question. Again, maybe I will put the assumption was it takes more time to change the income. So it's the time it takes to achieve reasonable changes on that particular one. But I totally agree with you. It's really dependent on a couple of things, and again, there is the possibility of changing that and bringing it, much earlier, because then, like you said, if people have proper systems to tell the costs and to be able to show how much money they are receiving or capture that, and they also feel that some of since the crop, like you said, is annual, that some of the things they are putting into practice could actually make that change earlier, then we can always bring it forward. And thank you very much for that suggestion. And I would hopefully we put that suggestion in writing, so that then we also capture it. I've written it, but I would want to capture it. But that's the kind of feedback that we need, because then it also supports some of the other members who are thinking, something like income or even discussions on profitability are far away, to change, or far away to reach to. And if we have in ourselves members that believe or stakeholders that believe it's something we could change, I think it's something we could share that practice with. And thank you very much, Camilo, for coming up with that one.
I have another question, if I may, and it's the following. In measuring the indicators, of course, you mentioned that we are you are kind of open to receive suggestions and on that particular how to measure the indicator. Something that I have come across in my experience and that I think is important is once you have identified the indicator, you should do the exercise backwards in terms of assessing who is measuring that indicator, whether it's at the farm level, how much it's going to cost to measure that indicator, how long it's going to take. Because some of the indicators, as good as they may look on paper, may prove very difficult to collect and gather. So that I think that's a nice exercise that I have done in the past is maybe prove to be useful in this case. It's just an open suggestions. I don't know if somebody else has additional comments on that.
Thank you very much on that. And before I comment on it, I'm opening it to the others just in case they have a comment on that too. Anyone have a comment on that before I put mine? Okay, thank you, Camilo, on that one. And on that particular one, and I know being a membership or a stakeholder-based organization, at times we call on our members, especially the ones that have been through such a process, to support us in trying to get that done. So I really like and really appreciate that suggestion, and I unfortunately, I might ask you to support us in, of course, helping us do this together with other participants in this panel who might also have been able to do that. So then we if efficiently do this exercise, for the rest of the members. So, and I'm going to get back on you on that one, Camilo, and any other member who is in this meeting who has that ability or who knows someone who can support in that. I would want us then to set, aside some time amongst ourselves, to go about that and then, just make it available for the rest. And it's exactly the one of the most wonderful suggestions I've had. Thank you, Camilo.
Okay, I'm ready for it. I knew that that question was going to lead to more work for me, but I am willing to do so.
We'll try as much as possible to make it efficient work so that then we don't take, 247 from you. But thank you very much for that. Any other before I go into, and again, for the rest of the attendees.
There's also a question in the chat.
Yes. So for the chat ones, and I see there's quite a number. I will go through them as they came. So the first one was from William, and again, William, you're open to comment more. And the question was, where are we as a platform in Kenya? The living wage is sending fears in some of the plantations. How soon is it to be demanded? So that was a question. And I know when we talked about the indicator, we talked about either a wage to either minimum or living. So William here is, of course, looking at it also from the point of if living wage is demanded, then what does that mean, for the platforms in Kenya? I don't know whether, William, you want to say something more about that, but as in that question, in relation to the indicator, I would say at this point, in terms of defining that indicator, it's not decided whether it's minimum or living wage, but that's up to, of course, the members then to say, maybe let's start with living wage because we've not even gotten to living wage, or maybe living wage is too low, let's use this other thing as a threshold. So from our point in terms of demanding that, I would say it's not yet, but I know different members, and especially also in this group, have different things to say about it, but I won't capture that here. But if anyone else has a similar question, please just throw it to us. Then the other one was, sorry, I missed, but the question is, reporting obligatory for each member? And if so, would it be possible to reduce to produce the first report in 2018? This particular question on the obligation of reporting, I think it's something that has even made it to the board. And I don't know whether, Jenny, you have something more to add, but I will start with my 2 cents on it. And if I miss on something, Jenny, please come back and add on that. Or Annette, I also see Annette in the attendees. But on this particular one, then it was not, it was made not obligatory, I think, for the first 18 months. And there's that discussion. But other than looking at it as we are pushing, we want to see how to make it as much as possible so easy for all of us to measure, such that then it becomes less about the date obligation, but more about how much we have been enabled to try and do that. And the other one, and I'll give Jenny a chance maybe to say more on that. And the other one is from Catherine. I see you are using gender and youth for the last indicator on improved livelihoods. And you're using gender and youth in the first are you using gender and youth in the first indicator as well? And on this particular one, the thing that I would want to say is the fact that we want to capture information on gender and youth, like I talked about, the metrics from the very beginning, such that then we can disaggregate most of these issues, whether it's productivity per farmer, also to what is the productivity of female and what is the productivity of male farmers. So ideally, we want to move that discussion even much lower in the collection of data, so that then we can talk about any indicator using that. So thank you very much, Catherine, for that question. And the other thing that had come up during the working groups is the ability of even disaggregating, not only on gender, but also on age. But those are questions, and I would ask the team, to add more of these when they can. The other questions, I have 2 places with questions. Can we share the indicators? Yes, and this presentation will be available. There will also be an email that you will receive for everyone that registered, which then will contain both the presentation and I think also a link to the recording if you just want maybe to share it with some of your other members and so on. So I think I've answered most of them. If I've forgotten something, please say. Jenny, I don't know whether you want to say something in closing. We have 5 more minutes. But also, if there's any member with a question, please feel free to bulge in.
So there are 2 things that are currently in the works, as George mentioned. We're working on finalizing the indicators and the methodologies behind them, and also the reporting tool. And so when those are finalized, then the reporting will become mandatory within a reasonable time period. But it's envisaged that by the 2018 membership assembly in October, that all members will have reported something against the indicators. This year already, we're already talking to some organizations about piloting the indicators and the reporting tool. And depending on how the development of that goes, we hope to have some at least some sample or some preliminary reports to show by the membership assembly. Otherwise, we'll use some existing data that we already have. And by the end of the year in December, we hope to have some reports where we can already show some conclusions. So we've already reached out to some organizations and we're definitely looking for more. So if you have existing data or you'd like to try out some of the indicators and see how it works for your organization, please get in touch with George, and we can add you to the the pilot team. Otherwise, expect sort of Q1, Q2 next year to get the notifications about what the mandatory reporting will be for 2018.
Thank you, Jenny. Any other comments from the team or so on? Quick question, quick info. And what I'll do, I'll take your next 3 minutes. I'll give you a quick poll just to rate, our ability to pass the information to you. So, you can click on either goods or bads or very good. So there'll be a poll on your screen. Please just throw it on, and then after that, I think we will give you a chance, to have a good evening. And thank you very much. And for those of you that it's morning, please take your time. So there's a question on your screen right now, and just rate it. We are trying also to use other indicators in this process. And because all of you are expert in indicators, please, and be very honest. And also in other cases, please feel free to reach out to us and, question the way we are doing things. And just like Camilo has said, volunteer to help us make this thing better. Because at the end of the day, if it's very good for you, it will also be very good for the sector. And that also looks quite good. So I've been told the panelists can't vote, so I need to move them, but I need to remove them from panelists. How do I do that? Oh, no, remove, yes. And thank you very much for the voting, and thank you very much for your time. There'll be an email confirming all the things that we've talked about, but feel very free to engage with us. And if you have questions, if you have everything, because we are building this thing for you and the industry, and we want it to be the best that you can ever have. So the other part is the next call will be on the 7th. So we welcome you, but we hope by that time, what we'll have done is we'll also have gotten some better feedback for you on these things, and there'll be more information to give you. So feel free. I think the invite was sent in the original email too, but we'll include it in the thank you email that we'll send you after this. Thank you very much. 45% has voted, and it's between good and very good. 2 very goods, 8, 9 goods, and no bad. So thank you very much also for that, and I wish you a good afternoon, morning, evening, and so on. And keep the information coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.